father to Vocare.
Thank you.
I wanted just to start, obviously you have begun your priestly life here in Falkirk, but like myself, you had most of your childhood and teenage years through in Kinghorn and Fife. I was wondering if you could talk us through your kind of childhood and teenage years and growing up prior to kind of following your vocation.
Certainly. So first of all, I was blessed to have a very happy childhood. I have a mum and a dad who love me very much and who've always supported me and encouraged me all through my life, and everything that I've undertaken. They've always been there for me, and I'm very grateful to them. I've also got a brother and a sister, both younger than me, Colin and Lindsay, who I've always been very close to, and who I still am close to now, which I'm very grateful for that as well. In fact, I was born in a place called Uddingston in the Diocese of Motherwell. And when I was about 8 years old, because of my dad's work, we moved to Fife. I grew up in Kinghorn, where I met you, and we went to school together. In fact, I didn't go to a Catholic school, so I went to the local primary school, to Kinghorn Primary, and then on to Bulweary High School, where again we were classmates together. And so for that reason, most of my friends when I was growing up were not Catholic, which was a blessing for me because it really encouraged me to think about what it was that I believed and what it was that I believed that was maybe a little bit different to most other young people in our school. That was a real, I must say, I never experienced any hostility. A lot of curiosity and a lot of good questions, but never really any hostility. So that was really my childhood and growing up.
And was there any point during your childhood or teenage life where you felt a calling or a vocation at all?
Some priests who you talk to, they say that they started thinking about the priesthood maybe, when they were 6, 7 years old. That wasn't really the case for me. In my family, we had a great respect for the priesthood, a great love for the priest. We would invite the priest round to our house for dinner. So I knew lots of priests and I was very comfortable with priests. But I must say, as I was growing up, it wasn't something that really ever occurred to me to think about. And that really began to change when I was about 12 or 13 years old. We had a couple of very inspirational priests in our parish who you would remember as well, and who really dedicated a lot of time and a lot of energy and a lot of love to working with young people, which we benefited a great deal from. And I can remember at that age coming to a realization that although I'd gone to church every week and although I tried to pray and so on, that these men, these priests, there was something real about what they believed. There was something real about what they had dedicated their lives to, And they encouraged me. I had lots of questions at that time, lots of questions about, partly from my other friends from high school and so on, questions about the existence of God, questions about who Jesus was, about what he said and what he taught, and about the church. I found whenever I had questions, first of all, that they listened to my questions and they treated me seriously, they treated me with respect, but they gave very compelling answers that made me realize that the existence of God and the person of Jesus Christ was something that gave meaning to the whole of creation, to everything that exists, but also to my own personal life, that this God who we believed in had created me for a purpose, and that my happiness would be found in finding out what that purpose was, finding out what God's will for my life was. I would say I was very inspired by these priests. And at a certain time, maybe when I was about 15 or 16, I began to think that might be something that I would like to give my life to as well. I didn't really talk to anyone about that for a long time. Whenever I prayed, whenever I went to Mass, at that time I was an altar server, this idea of becoming a priest, it kept coming back to me. It kept coming back to me, almost like an itch. I knew that I had to do something about it. And so I spoke to my parish priest and I expected him, to laugh at me or to tell me that was a ridiculous idea. And he didn't. He encouraged me and he said that was a wonderful thing, a wonderful blessing from God to think about. And he really encouraged me. He gave me lots of things to read. He introduced me to lots of aspects of the priestly life that I had never considered, things like visiting the sick and these sorts of things. And I had, the more that I learned about the priesthood and the more time that I spent with priests, the more I thought, this is something I really want to do. So
obviously you've spoken about the inspiration that parish priests were in your life and leading you towards a vocation as well as prayer as well. When you started to I suppose for want of a better term, scratch that itch that
Yes,
you're talking about
yes.
and went to seminary.
Yes.
Were there any inspirations within seminary as well that continued to build?
Certainly, certainly. So I trained for the priesthood. I studied to be a priest in Rome, in the Scots College in Rome, which was a tremendous opportunity. I didn't ask to go there. I was sent there by the bishop at the time. But being in Rome is an inspirational city in so many ways. In the seminary, we were blessed to have a number of very dedicated priests whose job it was to form us. We had a rector and a vice-rector and a spiritual director, and so they dedicated so much time to forming us into being priests for Scotland. Also, we came into contact with lots of other priests at the universities that we studied at, priests from different religious orders, from different, who had different ideas of the church, came from different countries and different backgrounds. Some wonderful theologians, some wonderfully clever people, and also introduced us to other ways of living out what it means for us to be Catholics, which was a tremendous thing. In particular, my spiritual directors were very helpful. I had a number of spiritual directors during my time in the seminary, and they were people who I could go to and talk to, and who would help me to hear God's voice, help me to discern what it was that God was asking me to do. And when I had challenges, they would help me to overcome them through prayer and through the sacraments and so on.
Okay, so after your time in Rome obviously led to your ordination. As someone who attended it, both the ordination and the first Mass, there were wonderful occasions. I'm just wondering if you could share with us some of the memories of those really special days.
Yeah, it's very special days, of course. I usually say that to couples when they're getting ready to be married. I always say, enjoy this moment and remember these moments, because sometimes we can be so caught up in all the practical details that it passes us by. And so I was really trying during my ordination and during my first Mass to be present to what was going on. I was ordained in the cathedral in Edinburgh, St Mary's Cathedral, and Kinghorn is across the water from Edinburgh. And the ordination was at 7 o'clock in the evening, so I remember walking along the beach with my dog Angus, and I could look over the water. It was a beautiful sunny day, and I could see Edinburgh. I couldn't make out the cathedral, but I knew more or less where it was. And I was thinking, goodness, in a few hours, that's where I'm going to be with this life-changing event. And the gospel passage that kept coming through my mind was in St John's Gospel after the resurrection, when Jesus appears to St Peter and to St John. And the question that Jesus asks St Peter after his betrayal and after all the mistakes that he's made in his life, Jesus asks him, "Do you love me? Do you love me?" And that was the question that I kept going through my mind. And I was thinking to myself that the Lord was trying to tell me that this was the most important thing, that I loved him and that I was trying to follow him, in spite of everything that I do wrong and in spite of mistakes and so on, that he was asking me to renew my commitment of love to him. Anyway, so we went into Edinburgh and we did the rehearsal for the ordination. It was a little bit messy and I was getting a little bit nervous, so I thought I have to get away from everything. So I went up to St Patrick's Church in Edinburgh, maybe a 15-minute walk, and they have a beautiful garden at the back. So I was sat in the garden, I was trying to pray and I was trying to concentrate. And this lady came up to me, and I was dressed like this, of course, I was a deacon at the time. And this lady came up to me and was sort of pestering me, was asking me, saying, "Oh, Father, where are you from?" And I said, "Well, in fact, I'm not actually a priest, I'm a deacon." And she said, "Oh, and when are you going to become a priest?" And I said, "In about 3 hours." And so she was laughing and she says, "Oh, that's great." But she kept talking to me, and I was thinking, I wish she would leave me alone so that I could pray. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized, actually, that's the reality of priestly life, is being open to whoever comes. And sometimes you would like just to be on your own with God, but that's not Christianity. Christianity is being open to serve other people. And in fact, that lady came to my ordination and I met her at the end, and she said, "Oh, I'm so glad I met you today." So that was that. And then the next day, going back to Burntisland, where our parish is, and celebrating Mass for the first time in that church where I'd spent so many times praying, so many times that I'd attended Mass there. And to be there and to celebrate Mass for the first time was a tremendous thing, to hold our Lord Jesus in my hands and to say those words of institution, "This is my body and this is my blood." Apart from that, to be surrounded by, likewise for the ordination, but I think I especially noticed at the first Mass, to be surrounded by all the people who had helped me to become a priest, with my mum and dad, my brother and sister, and all my friends and family from school, from university, from ever since then. It was just a wonderful thing, and to be joined at the altar by these priests who'd inspired me in the first place was an amazing thing, and just such a thankful thing. You know that the word Eucharist means thanksgiving, and my first Mass was a Mass of thanksgiving, and thanksgiving to God for all the blessings that He'd given me. So it was a wonderful, wonderful memories of those days.
So the life of a priest within a diocese, within a parish, obviously has its challenges. I'm wondering if you could maybe talk to us a little bit about those challenges and how you yourself deal with them.
Certainly there are challenges, but you know yourself as a new father that every life has challenges. Every life has these things that we need to ask for strength for. So certainly there are challenges. I think one of the things about being a priest is that if you are dedicated to your priesthood, you're part of people's lives at all sorts of moments of great joy, and also moments of great sadness and great difficulty. And there are times in all of those situations that my vocation in a special way is to bring Christ into those situations, both the happy situations and the difficult situations. So one situation in particular that I'm thinking of, a very tragic death in a hospital that I was called to go and attend to. A very young child died very suddenly. And I can remember being in my car driving to the hospital and praying and saying to the Lord Jesus, you're going to have to give me something to say. I don't know how to cope with this situation. I was never trained for this. I was never given the words to say in this situation. And of course, there's no training that can prepare you for these things. In fact, I had been trained. I'd been trained to turn to Jesus and to ask for His help and to ask Him to be the one who would give comfort to these people. And in fact, that was what it was. It was a moment of real grace. And that's been true, you know, almost every day. I go to my prayer, I go into the church, and I sit down on the bench and I talk to Jesus about what that day is going to bring, about all the people that I'll come into contact, all the different situations where I'll be, and I'll ask for His help. And then at the end of the day, I'll look back and I'll give Him thanks for the times that I've noticed His help, and I've noticed His presence, and ask forgiveness if I've made any mistakes, if I've failed in any of my duties, and ask for His help again for the next day. That's true of everybody, that we have to ask the Lord for help, but maybe especially for a priest.
If I remember rightly, your confirmation saint was St. Christopher.
That's right. Yeah.
I'm wondering if there are any other saints that have particularly inspired you.
Yeah, oh my goodness, too many to mention. So yes, St. Christopher is my confirmation patron. St. James the Apostle is the patron I was given at my baptism, who are both wonderful saints. Of course, the greatest of all the saints is Mary, our Blessed Lady, who's our mother. So she's got to be the top of the list. And Mary's one who I would always turn to in any situation to ask for her intercession and for her help. Other saints have inspired me for different reasons. You know, the apostles who we read about in the Gospels, you know, and who reveal so much of their personalities in these very few words that we have recorded of them, these very few episodes that they have revealed so much of themselves, especially St. Peter I'm thinking of, and St. John the Evangelist. Also saints from more recent times. I remember when I was in the seminary and when I was thinking about the priesthood, I would read biographies of priest saints, you know, and that really helped me, even saints who'd lived maybe a long time ago, but who lived out their priesthood. So there have been lots of priest saints who've inspired me. St. John Vianney is the patron saint of parish priests, has always been a great inspiration of mine. St. John Bosco, St. Pius X, wonderful priest saints. Other saints who I've been helped by their ideas studying theology, St. Thomas Aquinas and St. Augustine and Blessed John Henry Newman have helped me to understand the faith in lots of ways. If you twisted my arm, I hope you don't do that, but if you were to twist my arm and ask me to pick one, I'd probably pick a saint called St. Josemaria Escrivá, who was a Spanish priest who was born in Spain at the beginning of the 20th century. And he really inspired me as a university student because his spirituality, the message that he had for the world was that every one of us is called to be a saint. Whether you're a priest or a nun or a teacher like yourself or someone who works in a factory or who works in a supermarket. We're all of us called to be a saint. We're all of us called to contribute to the mission of the church, that we find our holiness, that we become saints, we meet God precisely in the ordinary duties of everyday life. So for you as a teacher and as a father and as a husband, you find God in living out those to the best of your ability. That's the vocation that you've received from God, and that's where you'll become a saint, by preparing your lessons well, by being open to your students, to changing your daughter's nappy. All these things are ways of becoming holy, of ways of becoming a saint. For me, my professional work, so to speak, is being a priest. So I'll become holy by doing all my priestly duties to the very best of my ability and offering them to God. And finding God in those things, finding God in the encounters that I have with the children in the school, with the sick people in the hospital, in the sacraments, in preaching, all of these things. That's where I'll become a saint, please God, and meet God.
A young person maybe comes to you, I know you're saying you're a chaplain here at St Mungo's, and speaks to you about vocation possibly to the priesthood or other religious life. What message would you give to them, or advice would you give to them?
I would try to put myself back in their position, depending on how old they were. The most important thing that I could say to them was to get to know Jesus. That's the most important thing. And when we get to know Jesus, when we talk to him about our lives and about our hopes and about our dreams, then he speaks to us in response, you know? And so I would always encourage people to do that, to be faithful to the Mass, to the other sacraments, to personal prayer. I would encourage them to do that. I would encourage them to confide in someone who they trust, me or another priest or a teacher, or someone who they trust, someone who they can talk to, and who, like those spiritual directors who I had in the seminary, who would help to discern God's voice and to help to point out things in our life that sometimes we don't notice. Sometimes it takes someone from the outside looking in and saying, well, you're very gifted in that way, or that sort of thing. So I would encourage them to talk to somebody about it. And in general, I would encourage them not to be afraid. I think especially when I was at university, I had lots of doubts and lots of difficulties. And I think I was really focusing on the sacrifices that the priestly life entails, and other vocations that people follow. I suppose I was looking at the things that I would have to give up and the things that I would have to say no to, rather than the things that I was saying yes to, and the opportunities that I was being offered. Pope Benedict, when he first became Pope, he echoed those words of John Paul II. John Paul II had encouraged the whole world to open wide the doors to Christ. And Pope Benedict echoed that in his first Mass as Pope. And he said, speaking especially to young people, throw wide open the doors to Christ. Do not be afraid of him. He said, when you open yourself to him, when you give your life to him, he takes nothing away, but he gives everything. And that's really been my experience, you know, that there are sacrifices and there are things that we give up, but the blessings outweigh them incomparably more. And I think, especially parents, parents worry about their children, and especially a young man who goes to their mother and said that they would like to become a priest. It can be a temptation for mothers to think about these sacrifices. I know my own mother wanted, I think she had imagined me, being a husband and being a father, and she wanted me to be happy, like all mothers. All mothers want their children to be happy. And I think she's seen my living out my priestly life, and before that in the seminary, that it's in being a priest that I've found happiness. That I found a happiness much greater than I could ever have imagined or could ever have hoped for, that I ever thought about when I was thinking about the priesthood. And so I'm so grateful to God for that. I'm so grateful for him having created me in the beginning, for having welcomed me into his church, and for having called me to serve him as a priest.
Thank you very much, Father, for your...
Thank you very much. Nice to speak to you.
I'm Bishop David McGough, an auxiliary bishop here in this archdiocese. I'm just so delighted, through yourselves, Christian faith will have a voice. And you're here today giving voice to that media. The greatest gift that any of us has is the gift of life itself. We struggle throughout our lives to live life to the full, and we sometimes mess it up, but that life is so precious. And it is God's gift to each one of us from the very first moment of conception to the last moment of our lives. to be cherished, to be loved, to be safeguarded. So God bless you all.
Shalom World, God's own channel.